All right, what's up, Great Lakes Draft League? This is Matt here, coach of the San Francisco Scizors in the Squirtle division, here with a draft reveal video. A little bit late on this one. I was out of town for about a week or so after the draft finished, so I didn't really have a whole lot of time to put this thing together until now, but here we are. I saw some other coaches making these draft reveal videos after their respective drafts finished, and I thought making one of my own might be a good way to sort of introduce myself and introduce my team to this league. I know some people in here, but it's a pretty big league, so I certainly don't know everybody. So I thought this would be a good opportunity for that. So that is what I will lead with, a little intro of me and my history in competitive Pokemon. I've been playing competitive Pokemon VGC specifically for quite some time. I started in 2014, back in the first format of Generation 6. I'm not the most decorated VGC player, but I've got some decent accomplishments. At least I made top cut at a regional back in 2017. It was actually December 2016 in San Jose, but it was the first. It was the 2017 format on Sun and Moon. I've come in first in a couple of local events. By local events, I mean premier challenges and mid-season showdowns. Those are the two tournament levels below a regional. I've made a bunch of top cut finishes in those local tournaments, and more recently I only played in one of the Players' Cups, but I ended up getting top 64 in North America in that first one, so that's pretty cool. Moving on down to my draft league history, this is probably, for those of you in Great Lakes who I know already, this is probably where I know you from other draft leagues, or through other people I've played in draft leagues with. Draft is where my talents tend to shine. I'm a much better draft player than a regular VGC player. The first ever draft league I played in was the multi-battle conference that started back in Generation 7. My teammate and I, Anthony, we won Season 4 of the multi-battle conference. We've played in 3 other seasons, made playoffs every time. Max Doubles League, which is probably the league that most of you know me from. I have won that league twice. Played in one other season as well, made playoffs there too. I played in Season 3 of Jin Furai's High Roller League. I made playoffs there as well. And I was also the front office for Toxic in Season 1 of GLDL. Normally, probably wouldn't put that on a draft league, accomplishments resume, but it seemed relevant here, given that that was the previous season of this very league. So, while this is my first time being a GLDL coach, I'm not completely unfamiliar with the league, so got a little bit of experience with GLDL there. So that's a little bit about me and my competitive Pokemon history, my draft league history, all that. So now I'm going to get into kind of the way that I was approaching this particular draft and my draft quote-unquote plan. So the last few some of the last few drafts I've been a part of, I was kind of sort of looking to try new stuff, but I was still building optimally, and I decided to move away from that and get a little weird with this draft. I've played a lot of draft league, and I've been wanting to branch out and get a little crazy with my draft at some point, and I thought that this league might be a good opportunity to do that. So my draft turned out a little bit. I guess I wouldn't say it's that weird, but I definitely developed some pretty strict limitations on my draft, which not all of them were things I decided on beforehand. I think the only thing I decided on beforehand was that I wanted this particular low tier type core, which I'm gonna get into a little bit more detail on in just a moment here. But part of me wondered, like, would it be viable to try a type core that's pretty much just low tier Pokemon? That seemed interesting, especially given the low tier core that I had picked out. I eventually ended up deciding this draft is going to have no redirection, no tailwind, no prankster. These are all pretty big staples in draft that I usually prioritize. And so as I went through the draft and was deciding on a final team composition, I decided, you know what, part of my experimentation here is that I'm gonna go without these things and see how viable that actually is. It's certainly gonna be harder without those things, but that's okay. I'm comfortable getting a little bit weird with my prep and experimenting with new modes and things like that. And if I lose some games along the way because of that, that's fine. I also ended up with a kind of a mid-speed Trick Room mode, also again with no redirection. Redirection is typically something I like to use to try to get Trick Room up, but I'm going with a little bit of a different direction here. And when I say mid-speed, I mean mid-speed compared to other Trick Room modes, and you'll see what I mean when I sort of get into my Trick Room mons there. And then there's also one Pokemon. I have two tier 1s, but there's one that I think is has some questionable value in tier 1, which is sort of what drew me to it, because I wanted to see if it was actually good in that tier. So but again, we'll get to that when we get to it. So as far as my plan for my draft going into it, I had a low tier type core picked out, and I decided that I was going to target those 3 Pokemon first, which is a little bit weird. I think I wouldn't even say it's a good draft strategy, but it was another piece of my experimentation. It was good for getting a few of the mons that I wanted, and it allowed me to get some low tiers that not only were part of a type core that I was interested in using, but that I thought were all very high value, that might not last too deep into the draft once people started picking over tier 4 and tier 5. It might also, part of the hypothesis here was that picking low tiers first and just kind of letting everybody have their way with the high tiers would allow me to have some uncontested picks in the high tiers and kind of take whatever I wanted after everybody picked over theirs, because nobody else would be picking from tier 1 or tier 2 like super late into the draft. So I thought it might be an interesting way for me to just have my way with those tiers however I want later into the draft once everyone else is done there. And yeah, I wasn't sure of this draft plan. I never actually thought it was good. If you're trying to draft optimally, I'd probably recommend you don't do this. But it seemed interesting, it seemed fun, it allowed me to get what I want, and I, at least in the first few rounds, and it let me try out something new and see how viable that particular draft strategy was. So this low tier type core, I'm sure some of you are already aware. It is this Firewater Grass core made up of Rapidash, Starmie, and Thwackey. I just thought all these Pokemon looked really fun and interesting. They're Pokemon that I've been looking to use for a while, not necessarily together, but individually they just looked really fun and interesting to use, and I also sort of just wanted to see like how good they actually were. And I haven't really gotten to use them before. mostly because I typically like to have a higher tier Fire, Water, Grass core, so there just hasn't really been room on a lot of my drafts for Pokemon like this. I've drafted Fire, Water, Grass cores before, like Volcarona, Blastoise, and Gourgeist. Something like Serena, Milotic, and Entei, Keldeo, Zarude, Magmortar, stuff like that. So it just didn't really make sense when I typically grab cores like that to also grab Pokemon like these in the lower tiers. So I wanted to kind of prioritize that. Especially, like I said, because these are mods that I've been using, I've been looking to try out for a while. They've always looked cool on paper. I thought they were pretty high value here, and they actually had a decent amount of synergy. Their speed stats are pretty decent. There's some good speed tiers here. The Thwackey not so much, but the priority glide kind of makes up for the not really being able to keep up with the other two speed-wise. I think they're pretty well-rounded for low-tier, frail-ish Pokemon. Thwackey less so, but I really love the coverage that comes from Starmie and Rapidash. And I thought they were all pretty high value given the tiers they were in. Rapidash is tier 5 here, and then Thwackey and Starmie are tier 4. Going into this draft, I noticed all of them were potentially under-tiered, especially the Starmie. But I think you can make an argument for moving all of them up a tier, actually. So, given that I've wanted to use all of these Pokemon before individually, they're all tiered very low. I was comfortable doing this weird draft strategy where I go for my bottom tiers first. It just seemed like a perfect opportunity to get these three Pokemon together, and I'm very happy with them. I'm very excited to be using them. I ended up going for Rapidash in tier 1, in round 1 from tier 5, mainly for the memes. If I'm going super optimally, if I'm going optimal, I probably don't go for a draft strategy like this at all, but if I had to, I would probably go for Starmie first, and then Thwackey, and then Rapidash, but tier 5 first seemed funny, so I did that, and I was pretty damn confident I was going to get all of these anyway, so it wasn't really a big deal. I didn't really expect anybody else to be dipping down into tier 4, in the first 3 rounds of the draft, so that seemed fine, and I got them pretty uncontested, so that was my plan for the beginning of the draft. Beyond that, pre-draft, I really hadn't decided anything else that I wanted to do after these 3, which was part of the overall draft strategy. I was sort of just thinking, all right, well, I'm going to go for these 3, and then reevaluate later on, because part of the strategy is to just see what's left over in the higher tiers a little bit later, and go from there. You can't really do much planning when you're starting your high tier picks in the middle part of the draft. So that's about all I had in mind. But when it got to round 4, I still wasn't really looking at the at the higher tiers at all. I was still kind of poking around for value in mainly tier 4. I started looking a little bit in tier 3, but I didn't really look at tier 3 until I decided that I was going to go for Berserker. Berserker was another Pokemon that I felt was pretty high value in the tier that it was in. It filled a role that I thought filled a role that I thought was kind of hard to come by, maybe in the lower tiers. That role being kind of a slow-ish Pokemon that has access to Fake Out and can also do decent damage and function under Trick Room. This led me to 2 things. It led me to the first kind of restriction that I put on my own draft, which is one I've actually done before, which is that I decided not to draft Redirection, because it seemed like for setting Trick Room, something like Berserker made things a little bit easier without having Redirection. It's something that can click Fake Out in order to support the Trick Room setter to help Trick Room go up. And then it's comfortable being inside of Trick Room, so it seems pretty good for that. So Redirection seemed less necessary, so I thought, I can try out this new Pokemon I've never used, I can dispense with the Redirection and try out a kind of a new sort of Trick Room mode here. And then it's the second thing that led me to was to start looking at what kind of Trick Room setter I wanted. And that's sort of what led me to Tier 3. Tier 3 is where you're going to find the bulk of your Trick Room setters, your Trick Room sweepers, that sort of thing. So I started looking through the Trick Room sweepers to decide what I actually wanted, what I sort of wanted to experiment with. I've used a number of different Trick Room sweepers, Trick Room setters before, so I wanted something new here. I was definitely going for a Ghost type, or at least some kind of Fake Out immunity. Seemed good since I had kind of a slow Fake Out, so I wouldn't want my Trick Room setter to get faked out before my Berserker was able to fake something out. So Fake Out immunity seemed good, and I started looking at Dusknoir and Oranguru, mainly for their speeds. I was looking at some other Ghost type Trick Room setters. Jellicent seemed okay, but I've never really been a big fan of it, and I had a Water type already, and Ghost Water and Psychic Water are gonna share like almost all of their weaknesses. And then there was also Cofagrigus and Runerigus that I was considering, but I decided that I actually didn't really want either of those, mainly because they are quite a bit slower than something like Dusknoir or Oranguru, which is usually a benefit. Base 30 is really great for Trick Room, but Dusknoir seemed like an interesting option, one I hadn't used before. I haven't really used a lot of Dusclops either in regular VGC or I've never drafted it before, but both of them are things that are relatively unfamiliar to me, and the 45 base speed instead of the 30 base speed was also something else I wanted to experiment with a little bit. I've always thought that 30 base speed was kind of like the baseline for like a really good Trick Room functioning Mon, and I've kind of harped on other Trick Room modes for not being as slow. I think there are times when you can get away with a Trick Room mode that's not super slow, but I tend to draft pretty slow as much as I can. I like to hover around base 30 at least. So getting Dusknoir at base 45 or Oranguru at base 60, I was definitely leaning toward the Dusknoir. But I thought it would be an interesting opportunity to see, once again, how viable is this? How viable is that kind of mid-speed sort of Trick Room mode instead of something super slow that is down in the 30s or maybe even below? So I do end up picking up Dusknoir eventually, but I decided to postpone the pick. And Dusknoir, of course, ends up being, I believe, the slowest thing on my draft at base 45. I do end up picking it up later, but I postponed the pick mainly because I decided to start looking at the higher tiers, mainly after the Berserker pick. I meandered into Tier 3 a little bit, and then before it actually got back to me in round 5, I had started actually looking at the top tiers as well, Tier 1 and Tier 2, because by that point I most people had picked up their tier 1s and tier 2s already. There were some tier 2 slots that were still kind of open, but I figured now was a good time to see, you know, what kind of team comps could I actually be looking at here a little bit later into the draft. There were a lot of team compositions I was considering here. There were a lot of interesting ones that I was looking at, like especially in tier 1. I was thinking about some team compositions with like Porygon Z, maybe Single Strike Urshifu, maybe Thundurus Incarnate. I was even looking at Landorus T. There was a lot of interesting stuff, but ultimately the team composition that I landed on was this Galarian Zapdos Hydreigon Tapu Lele mode with also a sand mode comprised of Hippowdon and Excadrill. I think if I had the points and if it was available, I probably would have liked to look at Gigalith over Hippowdon, but Gigalith was already taken by that point, so it wasn't even a consideration. Gigalith just seems like an interesting Pokemon that I've never drafted before, but just as well because it's a little bit too slow for my not so slow Trick Room mode. So I went with this team comp mainly because well, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, all of these Pokemon, really except for one, are completely new to me in draft. Galarian Zapdos in particular is something that I've been really wanting to use for a long time. Hydreigon is really the only Pokemon here that I've actually used before, and I was pretty comfortable picking it up again, even though I wanted to use new stuff because it is still kind of new to me. I used it in one season of MDL, where it was the very last Pokemon I picked up with a transaction in the regular season, and it only came to Team Preview twice in the entire season, and out of those 2 times, it only hit the field once. So it did end up being my MVP in finals there, which is interesting considering I hadn't really used it much all season. But yeah, that was the only time I ever really used it, and I think, you know, I'm not going to go into the team composition I had there, but I think it's going to function pretty differently here, considering the kind of team that I was using in that season. So really not a problem picking that up, even though I'm trying to experiment with new stuff. I feel like it still kind of counts, and everything else is completely new to me in draft. This team comp has some kind of old VGC combos, especially with the Tapu Lele. Lele Hydreigon are definitely a pair that you might have seen in like VGC 2018. Lele was also seen on a lot of sand teams. Not all of them had Excadrill on them. It was Lele Tyranitar was definitely very good, but Excadrill is definitely something you could throw on there. Strong Dragon type on sand teams has been pretty popular in general, especially in 2015. You might have seen a little bit of like Hydreigon Excadrill, even though I think the Dragon type of choice a lot of the time there was Salamence, so maybe it was hard to fit Hydreigon on some of those teams, but still a very valid combination. And I think also with these 4 picks, with the Galarian Zapdos, the Hydreigon, and the Tapu Lele, and Excadrill, I end up getting 2 very solid high-tier type cores in just 4 picks, which is kind of nuts. And I think they actually have they all have pretty damn good synergy with each other. Sometimes when you mix up your type cores like that, you might want some of your Pokemon functioning in one type core or the other, and those kind of might get in the way of each other. But I think there's enough synergy here between these 4 that the 2 type cores existing kind of overlapping with each other are not really gonna. It's not really gonna be too much of an issue. I don't think. I could be wrong. We'll find out. But another reason I wanted to go with this team comp is that it was lacking a bunch of these draft staples that I typically like to use. I mean, if we go back to the no redirection, no tailwind, no prankster thing, this is really where that part started. Those are definitely things that I like to prioritize. They're not, I wouldn't call them necessities when I'm trying to draft optimally, but they're definitely very powerful. They're things I'm comfortable with. They're things I'm good at using. And some of my other team comp ideas involved those things. Not so much redirection, because the redirectors have been taken by this point, but there were definitely some strong tailwind users and prankster Pokemon in some of the other team comps I was considering. So this one being really interesting, lots of synergy type cores. It's very strong, while also lacking some of those things that I decided would be good to go without for for the purpose of experimentation. The only part of this core that I really considered maybe changing was the dark type slot. I was not really super convinced with the budgeting that Hydreigon forced me into. I was considering some other dark types, like tier in tier 3 in particular. Zoroark was probably my second choice. But Hydreigon, with the amount of points that I had to spend, it kind of made me it ended up making me take another tier 5, which initially I was really not crazy about, because I figured I didn't really want to have a team that had any dead slots, and I think a lot of teams ended up with at least dead slots in tier 5, which, like, I don't blame anybody else for doing that. I think it's actually pretty hard to when you have a super low tier like that you're forced to draft from. It's pretty hard to draft a team with absolutely no dead slots, where you can actually see every single Pokemon on your draft coming to a match a decent amount of times. And I didn't really want that to happen, so I was not super excited about having to draft another tier 5, but I noticed there were some not fully evolved Unburden users down there, and it seemed, which seemed like a pretty good thing to pair with the Tapu Lele. The main one I was considering first was Drifloon, but I actually already drafted Drifloon in Dan's Premier League, which I'm playing in right now, and it was also a Tailwind user, which I again kind of wanted to go without. So if I'm drafting optimally, I probably pick the Drifloon in that slot, but again, wanted to go for new stuff. Had already kind of decided don't really want Tailwind on this draft to see how viable that is, so I ended up going with the Swirlix instead. And once I found Swirlix, it kind of solidified Hydreigon's spot on the team as well, because with the Swirlix, I was very comfortable taking another Pokemon in a tier 5 slot, which of course the Hydreigon was the thing that kind of forced me to do that. I guess I should talk a little bit about Excadrill here too. If we go back to this slide here, Excadrill is the one thing that I thought was maybe questionable in value. It's definitely a good Pokemon. I don't think it's bad. I just, in most draft leagues I've played in or seen a tier list from, Excadrill tends to be in tier 1 or A tier, S tier, whatever the top tier is. Excadrill is usually there, and I've never really had super strong feelings about it. I've never thought like, oh man, Excadrill needs to get bumped down here. But I've always been at least mildly skeptical of it. It's a good mon, but I feel like it rarely gets picked. At least from what I've seen. Maybe you've been in draft leagues where it's gets picked all the time and it's super powerful. I don't know. But in my experience, it seems like something that doesn't get picked much. Its value in tier 1 compared to most or all other things in the same tier is a little bit questionable. I don't know. So anyway, that sort of drew me to it again for more experimentation purposes. It's one of these Pokemon that I kind of want to find out, like, is it worthy of this tier 1 slot? And I hope to find out that the answer is yes. That would be cool, because I'm at least excited to use it on this team. It looks very good here. So that's what I landed on for the rest of my team composition. And this team comp was really what drove me to end up postponing that Dusknoir pick, or whatever my Trick Room setter would end up being. Of course, it is Dusknoir, but I was sort of okay maybe taking a backup Trick Room setter, because a lot of the stuff on the team comp, once I decided on what I wanted the rest of my draft to look like, I knew that for a lot of these mons, maybe all of them, there really were no backup picks, so I had to prioritize them instead of that Dusknoir. I might have even prioritized them over Berserker if I had decided on this kind of team composition earlier, but here we are in round 5, picking up the Galarian Zapdos. I figured this is probably the member of the team that was most likely to get taken by really anybody else. For some of these picks, I was a little bit worried that like 1 or 2 specific people might take them, even though it seemed kind of unlikely. For Galarian Zapdos, this early in the draft, still a tier 2, like I really wasn't sure who might be willing to take it, so I wanted to pick it up as soon as I could. It was the only thing I really felt like I had to reach for, and it also allowed me to pivot to another team composition just in case I had kind of an emergency in between my round 5 and round 6 picks. I had some of the other team compositions that I was considering were they also featured Galarian Zapdos, so it allowed me to pivot to something else if I really needed to, but I didn't really expect to, and I ended up getting everything I wanted. The next one was Hippowdon here. As we were going back up from 12 to 1 in round 6, I decided Hippowdon was really important to get at least before it got back to Ron, because I noticed that Ron had Dracovish with no sand. There was already, I believe Tay already took Gigalith and Dracozolt, so he had his sand mode locked down and wasn't really worried about him, sniping anything. Picking Hippowdon would have forced Ron to end up going with Tyranitar if he really wanted sand, which I don't think he ended up picking. So that was. I was definitely worried about that getting sniped if I didn't pick it up here, and I also thought that because Gigalith was already taken, and nobody really was able to afford 2 tier 1s. I mean, on paper there were some people who could afford 2 tier 1s, so they could take T-Tar Excadrill, but like it just didn't really make sense even for people who still had the points available. So I figured taking the Hippo here meant that waiting for Excadrill until very late was super safe, because nobody's taking Excadrill without sand, and sand became really hard to come by after the Hippo and Gigalith were both gone, and people didn't really have a lot to work with in terms of tier 1 slots left. So Hippo in round 6 was a really important pick. And then moving in around 7 and 8, I picked up the Hydreigon and Lele. I did consider, again, getting the Dusknoir before these two, but I kind of realized, well, I could, but like this really just came down to what do I have backups for? And the answer for Dusknoir was I had backups for Dusknoir. They weren't great, they weren't ideal, but they were fine. But for Hydreigon and Tapu Lele, since I had already started with this whole team composition, they were pretty essential. There were again, there were a couple other people who had the points to maybe take one of them. I thought it was unlikely that they would, but just in case, I just needed to get the stuff that was most important and that I had no backup options for. So round 7 and 8 was that Hydreigon and Tapu Lele. Round 9, I finally got my Dusknoir. I'm very happy that it was still there and that I didn't have to go with a backup. I got my number 1 preferred Trick Room setter, so that should be fun. And then to round out the draft, I picked up the Excadrill, which I was originally thinking about leaving until round 11, but again, I picked it up before the Swirlix just because, it's very important to pick that thing up since I didn't have any backups, and it was very important to the team composition. I think I think maybe it was Ron or somebody else that might have had room for a tier 1, and again, it was one of those situations where I was like there's no way they're gonna pick Excadrill, but just on the off chance that they do, I'm kind of boned, and that would be really horrible. And Swirlix, while it's going to be cool, is less essential, and even if Swirlix gets picked up, I can just take Drifloon, whatever. So I picked up Excadrill there. The order here is not really that important. I'm sure I would have gotten both Excadrill and Swirlix anyway. Yeah, that is how I finished off my draft. And there's the full squad here. I've got the Excadrill, Tapu Lele, Hydreigon, Galarian, Zapdos, Hippowdon, Dusknoir, Berserker, Starmie, Wacky, the star of the show, Rapidash, and the Swirlix. So yeah, I'm very satisfied with this team. I'm very excited to have gotten a lot of these Pokemon that I've been looking at for a while. This weird little low tier Firewater Grass Core. I really hope it comes to as many games as possible. I've already scouted out a couple of matchups in my division where I can bring some of these. It's just going to be super fun, and I'm very, very, very happy that I got such a strong, high tier team composition, despite not having some of the normal staples that I have in draft. I've got decent speed control despite having no tailwind. The Swirlix offers some speed control. I've got the Sand for Excadrill. I've got Stab Max Airstreams with Zapdos. So there are still options here despite not having that super solid tailwind. Or the Prankster and Redirection, not having those is not as good for me. But in this league where I'm just going for experimentation and just kind of having fun using new stuff, that's fine. I'm so just really excited to have gotten a good team despite all of that. So I don't really anticipate making any transactions. I didn't really feel like I made any mistakes with my draft beyond limiting myself in ways that were obviously intentional. So maybe I'll find a hole here or something that wasn't as good as I thought it was, and might make a trade at some point. I'm not really sure, but at least on paper, I mean, this team definitely looks worth sticking with, and I'm definitely very excited to be using it. So that's all I've got for my draft reveal video. I have no idea if I'll be making any more content before during the season aside from actual battles. So if not, then I will see you guys on the server, and I will see you guys for my week 1 match. Peace.